The Carney government's first test highlights a week of surprises in the House of Commons. This is Now You Know. I'm Rob Snow.
Navigating the issues that matter to you. It's Now You Know with Rob Snow on News Radio.
The king is long gone from Ottawa. The first ministers have had their meeting in Saskatoon, and Trump has doubled tariffs on steel and aluminum. But today, the political scene shifts back to the House of Commons for a vote on the government's speech from the throne. And a vote on the speech from the throne is a confidence vote, meaning if the Liberals lose the vote, there could be another federal election. While few expect that to happen, it is worth paying attention to, because the Liberals lost a vote on amendments to their throne speech just a few days ago. The stakes are much higher today. The Conservatives have been pressing the Carney Liberals to present an economic update or a full budget this spring. The Liberals at first said there would be no budget this year at all, but later said they would present one in the fall. That's not good enough for the opposition. Here's Conservative MP Dan Albas.
Mr. Speaker, Parliament demanded a budget from this Liberal government. Last night, a Conservative motion passed calling on the Prime Minister to table a budget this spring. The Liberals are asking Parliament to approve $500 billion in Liberal spending with no budget. Despite promising to spend less and cap government spending at 2%, they've increased it by 8%. Single moms, seniors, small business owners must budget before they spend. Parliament wants these Liberals to do the same. Will the minority Liberal government listen to the majority in this House and table a budget immediately?
The Prime Minister, Mark Carney, new to the whole spectacle of question period, is nevertheless willing to mix it up with his opponents on the other side of the aisle, like Dan Albas.
Fact. The majority of the chamber voted last night for a spring budget. Fact. On what date will the Liberals face the facts and table a budget for their $500 billion in new spending?
The right honourable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, the First Ministers agreed on a plan to build this great country, stand up to Donald Trump. Fact. That's right. Mr. Speaker, the Government of Canada is imposing tariffs that cause maximum impact on the United States, minimum impact on Canada. Fact. On over $60 billion of U.S. exports to Canada. Fact. Raised over $1.7 billion already. Fact, fact, fact.
Outside the theater of question period, the Liberals also offered a glimpse into one of their first big bills. It's called the Strong Borders Act, and it's a whopper. If passed, it would restrict access to asylum claims. It would give Canadian intelligence agencies more abilities to collect data and share information with their counterparts in the United States. There would be new restrictions on cash transactions over $10,000. And Canada Post and law enforcement could open your mail without a warrant. The details of the proposed legislation were outlined by the government's new public safety minister, Gary Anandasangari, who was asked if these measures were designed to appease the Trump administration.
Canadians elected a new government on April the 28th with the mandate to ensure the safety and security of Canadians, including securing our border, and many of the measures speak to that. Of course, there's elements that will strengthen the relationship with the United States. There are a number of elements in the bill that have been irritants for the U.S., so we are addressing some of those issues, but it's not exclusively about the United States. It's also about ensuring that our immigration system, for example, the integrity of our immigration system is strengthened, and the processes are in place so that Canada can be a stronger country with strong borders and strong provisions for the provision of, for example, on searches when many other countries have been much more advanced in having lawful access, for example.
This bill is massive, and its contents will come as a shock to some. On the immigration file, for example, anyone who claims asylum after having been in Canada for more than a year would not get a hearing at the Refugee Board. Instead, they could be deported. On the criminal investigation side, yes, the proposed law would give police more powers to search the mail expand the authority of Canada Post to open people's letters. No reason to be alarmed, though, according to the public safety minister.
Look, I've worked my entire life in the protection of human rights and civil liberties. That's a marquee part of the work that I've done before politics, in politics. So in order for me to bring forward legislation, it needed to have the safeguards in place. It needed to be charter in line with the values of the Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms. And I fundamentally believe that we have strike the balance that while expanding powers in certain instances does have the safeguards and the protections in place to protect individual freedoms and rights.
But not everyone is convinced this bill hits the mark. Jenny Kwong is an NDP MP from Vancouver.
I think that the title of the act is for show for the Trump administration. They are trying to create this illusion that Canada's border is more secure in some way. But however, a lot of the components within the bill targets Canada's own immigration policies and processes. That has nothing to do with the United States, as an example. If the government really want to make sure that we crack down on safety for Canadians, on preventing firearms, illegal firearms in crossing the border, as an example, or drugs crossing the border, then they should actually put back, for example, the port police.
Also simmering discontent among First Nations leaders who say they feel excluded from the discussions around nation-building projects. Some warn there could be protests similar to the Idle No More protests of a dozen years ago. Nova Scotia Liberal MP Mi'kmaq Jaime Batiste is trying to calm those waters.
Well, I would say that's inaccurate.
Can you elaborate?
We have a First Nations premier who's at the table every time. We have an Inuit premier. I think that all of the discussion points from the big projects that we're looking at are prioritizing projects that have buy-in from the Indigenous communities already.
And I take your point, but I raise you the Assembly of First Nations and other groups who were not at the table and who are going to meet with Mr. Carney in July, apparently.
And I think it's, when we're looking at the big projects, it's important that the rights holders, if impacted, are at those tables in a proactive way ahead of time. But my understanding is the initial conversations have all been around those projects that have buy-in from Indigenous communities will be the ones prioritized.
As it stands now, the House of Commons will kick into action in about 2 hours from now, sit for about 5 hours, and if anything unexpected happens with the confidence vote on the throne speech, of course, we will let you know. On Now You Know, on News Radio.
You have questions.
Now You Know with Rob Snow has the answers.
On News Radio.
It's Bank of Canada Day, with the Bank of Canada making its latest decision on interest rates. It's on hold. No rate hike, no rate cut today. For some analysis, we're joined by Richard Forbes, principal economist at the Conference Board of Canada. Thanks for joining us.
Hi, Rob. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, great pleasure. Why did the Bank of Canada remain on hold?
Well, essentially, it was very similar to the last Bank of Canada announcement, where there's just way too much uncertainty in the economy still today. And, taking into account, the Canadian economy actually performed a lot better than most expected in the first quarter of the year, which is kind of putting a lot of the recession fears on the back burner, at least in the really near term. So combining those two facts, that the economy is doing a little bit better than they thought, and there's still plenty of uncertainty surrounding trade policy and tariffs. Ultimately, the bank thought the best idea was just to play the wait-and-see approach, much like last month.
Okay. What do you think the Bank of Canada will be looking at in the coming weeks and months before the next decision on interest rates?
Well, I think the first thing is how the situation surrounding tariffs evolves. The U.S. administration had really been softening its tone since the Liberation Day, they called it, on April 2nd, really walking back a lot of the tariffs that they plan to put on a lot of the countries. But then that being said, just a few days ago, President Trump announced the doubling of steel and aluminum tariffs that are supposed to go into effect today. So it's really been a lot of flip-flopping from the U.S. administration. So I think the Bank of Canada is closely monitoring that and ultimately seeing if any of the trade disruptions, if they affect the Canadian economy negatively, then they'll certainly have to act a little bit faster on reducing interest rates.
At the Conference Board of Canada, what is your forecast for interest rates for the rest of the year?
Well, we certainly see that the Bank of Canada needs to reduce interest rates by another quarter point. Right now, we're thinking it's going to be in July, so at the next meeting. And as of today, that seems like the most likely scenario. But, if this uncertainty keeps going on, it just makes it more likely that they're going to wait. But that being said, we are thinking that it'll be in July as of today.
What are the chances that the Canadian economy could slip into a recession? The Bank of Canada seems surprised, as you pointed out, at the resilience in the economy right now. But what are the chances of a recession?
Well, the way things are today, we think the chances are pretty slim. The Canadian economy, like we were talking about, has shown pretty good resilience to start the year. The tariffs that are in place on steel and aluminum and, automotive vehicles, these are really bad tariffs for those sectors in particular. But when looking at the Canadian economy as a whole, it's still kind of moving along pretty well this year. So the chances are pretty low as of today. But then again, because we don't know what the U.S. is going to do with trade policy still, there's still a lot of downside risk to that outlook.
Why do you think the Canadian economy is performing as well as it is these days?
Well, certainly some of it has to do with the threat of tariffs. We've been talking a lot about the uncertainty surrounding tariffs, but actually that uncertainty has pushed a lot of businesses in the U.S. to just accelerate importing things, including a lot of goods from Canada. So that certainly helped growth in the first part of the year. And the other side of it is it goes back to what we were talking about before all this trade stuff, was that interest rates have been on the way down for about a year now. So that, before all this trade discussion over the past few months, 2025 was looking like a pretty bright year for the Canadian economy. So it's just going to show that a lot of this, reduction in interest rates and other kind of big picture factors might be kind of dwarfing the uncertainty surrounding trade, at least right now.
Okay. So in other words, a lot of the growth or the strength that we're seeing, it maybe, I guess my term would be front end loaded, anticipating that things could get worse. So a lot of economic activity that maybe would not have been happening is happening in anticipation of a tariff impact. Is that fair enough?
Yeah, absolutely. That's certainly part of the story.
Okay. Richard Forbes, thank you for your time today. Great to hear from you.
All right. Thanks, Rob.
Yeah. Richard Forbes is a principal economist at the Conference Board of Canada on this Bank of Canada Day. I'm Rob Snow. This is Now You Know on News Radio.
No question goes unasked or unanswered.
Now You Know with Rob Snow returns on News Radio.
Here with David Smith on a Wednesday, and if you're ever looking for a podcast of our show, Now You Know with Rob Snow, we have a great new mobile app that will help you hear our show when you want to. Listen live, listen to the podcast. It's called the Seeker app. That's Seeker, spelled S-E-E-K-R, and it has all kinds of exclusive audio you won't hear anywhere else, news, music, and sports. You can download it for iOS or Android. That's Seeker, spelled S-E-E-K-R. And Now You Know with Rob Snow, also on Spotify and Apple Podcasts or wherever you get your podcasts. Dave Portnoy in the news. David Smith.
Yeah.
It doesn't put Toronto in a very good light. Talking about the city of Toronto. So Dave Portnoy is, I would call him a sports influencer. He is the founder of Barstool Sports. Right? like a mogul also in gambling, like sports gambling. They're involved in that as well, I think. Running a game book, whatever. And he does these pizza reviews, one bite reviews.
Yeah.
He goes to various pizzerias all over the place. One bite, he makes some remarks on it, and he gives them a grade or whatever, and they're very popular online. So he's in Toronto. He's attending some kind of cryptocurrency event in Toronto. He goes to Toronto pizza place to do one of these one bite reviews, and then this happens.
So he's calling this old school terrazza. One bite, everybody knows the rules. We didn't get here the first time. Place is very cool on the inside. We got Frankie Lazzani's whole story, which almost seemed borderline not believable. See, there we go. There we go. What are you guys fucking laughing about? Exactly. So here we go. One bite, everybody knows the rules. We won't let that get into what is that Toronto hospitality?
I mean, that's just such a bad look. That is such a bad look for Toronto. Like, one idiot is all it takes to put your entire city in like a bad light.
Yeah. To an audience
he's sitting there. He's going to have a piece of pizza. He's going to review this pizzeria. It could go viral, be good for this business. And some idiot is going by and says, F the Jews. And then he has to turn around and like admonish these young guys who are, because they kind of laugh at it. Right. And he says, well, what are you effing laughing about? What is that? Toronto hospitality there, he says?
Yeah, that's what he says.
Yeah, terrible. Terrible. Not a good look for Toronto. What is becoming of Toronto the Great? I might ask our friend Michael Taube about that. He loves to weigh in on all things Toronto. He's with us tomorrow. I would like to know if I have to move to Lethbridge, Alberta to win the lottery.
You might. Yeah, how about that?
They have the luckiest guy out there. Wouldn't you like to know what's going on? David Sirkin is his name. He's been in the news. He's won the lottery 4 times. 4 times, David. And in the last 9 months, he's won $2.5 million. Okay, so on May 3rd, he won the 649 gold ball draw. He won $1 million. May 3rd. Last year, on the 20th of August, he won $500,000 in the Lotto Max. And then in November, he won another $1 million on the 649. So in less than 9 months in the lottery, he's won $2.5 million. 12 years ago, he won $250,000. The odds, I've mentioned this before, the odds of winning the Lotto Max are 1 in 33 million. 1 in 33 million. And he's won the lottery. He's won 4 big jackpots in the lottery. Like the smallest one, $250,000.
Do we think there should be some kind of once a year provision for the lottery, or is that?
Do we think there maybe should be some kind of investigation? Is what I'm thinking. Like, how is this possible?
Maybe
they had an insider scandal in the Ontario Lottery Gaming Corporation. I don't know. I'm not accusing anyone of anything. Quote: I went for a coffee with the boys after I checked my ticket. They asked to see it and said, "Not again, not again." And oh man, somebody's lucky.
The Newsday panel.
Yes, it is time for the Newsday panel with a lot in the mix today. Susan Smith is with us, principal at Blue Sky Strategy Group. How are you, Sue?
Very well, thank you.
You enjoying the hot weather for a change?
Loving it. Summer has arrived today.
Yeah. It's a nice change of pace. Chris Sims is here, the Alberta director of the Canadian Taxpayers Federation, former journalist, used to work on Parliament Hill. How are you?
Wonderful, Snowman. It's gorgeous here in Lethbridge.
Lethbridge, where it is 14 degrees. I just looked it up, 14. That's not nearly as, we're about 10 degrees warmer already in Ottawa. So.
Oh, wow. It's brilliantly sunny here, though. We just had a huge thunderstorm last night, so it's got that kind of nice, washed, sunny soaked. It's quite wonderful.
Good. That's good. Susan, what's your reaction to how the First Minister's meeting went this week in Saskatoon? What'd you think of it?
Yeah, you know what? Well, first one that has been held in Saskatchewan in more than 40 years. So I think that's a coup, and that was a good signal sent by the Prime Minister and the Premiers. I think what struck me was the length of the communique and the amount of the agreement in it. You know, there was nobody standing up and storming off from the table. They all agreed. You know, the purpose of the meeting was to build a stronger, more competitive and resilient Canadian economy. And the last line of the communique is it went through how they were going to look at building nation-building infrastructure projects and expedite reviews for natural resource projects, making sure that Indigenous communities have the opportunity for economic participation and consultation. The communique itself wrapped up with the fact that the First Ministers agreed to continue to work, I've got the notes here, collaboratively and address the priorities of all Canadians in every region of the country, and that they're going to meet to work on shared priorities for Canada's security and economic resilience. So I was pleasantly surprised. You know, had a good chuckle at Doug Ford and singing "Love Is in the Air" on his way in. But I think there was a remarkable amount of goodwill around the table and a desire to get things done.
Okay. What did you think of how things went, Chris?
Definitely feels like a temperature change. It definitely feels like there's adults in the room. I've noticed a big tone switch. The catch, of course, is going to be in action. So it's great that they said that they want to get things done like pipelines, but of course the details matter. So Carney and his government need to do some simple things like get rid of the energy cap, get rid of Bill C-69, basically in layman's terms to, you know, get out of the way with, of course, proper environmental regulations and consultation, but to let stuff get built. The concern from the Taxpayers Federation is that we don't want the government building the stuff. We don't want the government building another pipeline, because the last time that happened, they spent $30 billion of taxpayers' money. We want companies to responsibly use their own money to build pipelines. I don't think Carney's into spending taxpayers' money to build megalopolis projects. I don't think he's that type.
I don't think the public appetite is there for that either. Yeah, I don't think the public appetite is there either. But look, I mean, one of the backdrops for this is anger in the West. Lots of news stories about a growing Western separation movement. And one of the big things I think that we have to look for coming out of this meeting is whether the Prime Minister, because of his outreach, has managed to lower the temperature on those items. And I'd like to know what you think, because you had, you know, premiers like Scott Moe and the Alberta Premier Danielle Smith. They sounded happy with the way things went. What would you say, Susan?
Yeah, one of the I think the temperature has changed. The temperature and tone has changed, as Chris alluded to. One of the things that has happened immediately with Tim Hodgson being appointed the Natural Resources Minister, he's a new MP from Toronto. He's been out on the road and you know, calling people, meeting with energy sector CEOs in both clean and conventional energy. And the reports I'm getting from people who've had these conversations with him are that they're very pleased and impressed with the conversations that are taking place. The other thing that happened last Sunday, which was a bit less publicized than the First Minister's meeting, is Prime Minister Carney met with about 40 leaders from the oil and gas sector, as well as the clean energy sector, for a roundtable, a 2-hour meeting where they had constructive, concrete discussions on things. And right to, you know, Chris's point about how the private sector must play a role in bolstering Canada's energy security. And I think that's part of the tone change, because Danielle Smith, no matter what, she plays to her elected base. She's always worried about her seat, and she's always worried about an election or a putsch from within caucus. But it's harder for her to make the kind of noise on separatism if the business leaders of Alberta are not making that kind of noise, and they're not.
Any thoughts on that, Chris? On this lowering of the temperature, changing of the tone? What do you think? I mean, you're out there. What do you think?
Yeah, Susan's right in a way. However, specifically within the context of Alberta, and especially when we're talking about things like sovereignty pushes and people who are fed up, et cetera, we got to be careful with they met with oil executives, so everything will be fine. That can lead to a few things. That can lead to big corporate welfare, which we do not want to see, which is a waste of taxpayers' money, and it can lead to things like big honkin' industrial carbon taxes. When Rachel Notley, the former Alberta premier here in Alberta, announced her sudden surprise carbon tax, she had oil executives hugging and kissing her on stage. And it wound up costing Albertans a surprise more than $1 billion. So I am taking that with a bit of a blue pill. I'm happy to see it happen. I hope that just means that they're not going to spend taxpayers' money doing it, but I'm really being cautious on things like corporate welfare.
Okay, we'll talk a little bit more about what's being called the grand bargain. You know, maybe it's carbon capture and storage in exchange for a pipeline. That sounds like the grand bargain. That's something that Premier Smith talked about at the closing event of this First Ministers meeting.
I think there would probably be a collective shoulder shrug related to that comment.
Okay, we'll be right back. I'm Rob Snow. It's our Newsday panel. Here with Susan Smith, Chris Sims, a couple of friends of mine talking politics today. I'm kind of shocked by what I'm reading about the government's omnibus bill, the Strong Borders Act. Police searching the mail without a warrant, Canada Post opening any mail, including letters, law enforcement agencies getting IP addresses without a warrant, more restrictions on cash transactions over $10,000, an asylum claimant who's been in Canada for more than a year, no hearing. Where did this come from? Susan Smith, your thoughts, please, on this bill.
I think... And Rob, I haven't read all the clauses of the bill. I think there's some more nuance to some of those things. I know it's hard to sum it up. Things, for example, like the asylum, no hearing. It's not that you have no hearing. It's if you have not claimed asylum within a certain period of time, then you're ineligible for a hearing. So I think that prevents people gaming the system. Broadly, I think that the bill addresses a number of outstanding issues, some to deal with some of the irritants with the U.S., others to deal with securing our borders writ large. I noted a provision that I liked, actually, which was the ability to examine containers for export. So if you think about the Port of Montreal, where stolen cars were going out, typically the rules were you can only examine on import. Now there's powers for export. I do expect there to be vigorous debate in the House of Commons over this. I expect this is a bill where there will be amendments. But I think on the whole, it's addressing some of the major irritants. Like on the $10,000 cash, for example, and I'll wrap up after this, it's preventing cash transactions of larger than $10,000 to prevent money laundering. If you're totally upfront, I don't know why that would be a problem for you. The only people are going to be upset about that are people who are trying to unload
without a warrant that bothers me. I would like to think that if the if law enforcement
in a
wants
criminal
to
investigation, though, I think
if law enforcement wants to search my sock drawer, it has to go before a judge and get go ahead from a judge before it can come into my house and search whatever's in my sock drawer, let alone open my mail or give the law enforcement my IP address without a warrant. This is very alarming. So I will wonder what the civil liberties organizations are going to say about this.
I think it's really important that people read the extra clauses that are associated with that. It's not just a blanket statement like that. But to be fair, I do think this is something where there will be a healthy and robust debate in Parliament, and that's what Parliament's for. Crime, quote-unquote crime, was an issue in the campaign, and they're trying to address some of this.
You have 1 minute, Chris. Sorry about that.
No, it's okay. This is an important issue. Professor Michael Geist just put out a really important deep dive on this, so thank you to David, your producer, for flagging that. I would encourage everybody to go read that. Again, it's by Michael Geist. We run into this all the time, where an emergency comes up and the government uses it to its advantage to bring in more power and more control. And of course, every reasonable person would say, of course, you can scan a container that's in the Port of Montreal, but why do you need access to an IP address? What is this about not having warrants? People need to be really vigilant about their civil liberties because getting them back once they're gone is really difficult. And this it doesn't matter if it's the red team or the blue team. So we need less government, not more government. They got to be careful here.
Good to hear from everyone. Enjoy the rest of your day. We'll speak soon. All the best.
Thanks, Rob. Take care.
Yeah, bye-bye. Susan Smith and Chris Sims are Newsday panelists today. Talk back right after the latest breaking news on News Radio.
It's time to talk back.
On Now You Know with Rob Snow.
Call now.
And have your say.
1-833-668-2577.
Welcome to Talkback. 2 hours of debate and discussion on the big issues of the day. And today's topic, something a little bit different. The news. And in particular, the news business in Canada. We just want to kind of turn things around, run a few things by you, find out what you think about the news business in Canada these days. At 1-833-668-2577. 1-833-668-2577. We like to do this every now and then. You know, this is a news and an opinion show, and we assume that one of the reasons you're listening to a show like this is because you're interested in the news and because you want to stay up to date on what's happening and you're listening with a critical ear. So you're the perfect people to ask about what you think about the news business these days in Canada. And we have all kinds of questions that we want to run by you, but just consider these questions to be conversation starters. And, you know, we're open to seeing where the conversation takes us over the next couple of hours. That's what we love to do with Talkback. So here's a question for you. Trust in the news. Big issue these days. Trust in the news. Do you trust what you hear in the news? What would you say? Do you think the news is reported fairly, accurately, without bias? What would you say? Trust in the news. Trust in the news. How much would you say you trust what you hear or what you see on the news? We ask that because trust in the news has been declining in Canada in recent years. No secret there. We just kind of want to understand it better. That's one kind of angle that we can explore. Another is paying for the news. We also want to know more about this, paying for the news. Do you pay for the news? Do you pay for the news? Are you willing to pay for the news? Do you have a subscription, say to your local newspaper or whatever the case might be? Do you subscribe to a news service? What happens when you hit a paywall? You just give up? Okay, I can't read that story. I'll move on to another story. You just give up on trying to read a news story? We're just curious. Are you willing to pay for news? Where do you stand on government support for news organizations? Would really love your take on this one. Government support for news organizations. Just had my friend Chris Sims on from the Canadian Taxpayers Federation, Alberta director there. She's totally opposed to this. Government support for news organizations. And of course, the federal government is offering all kinds of programs to help struggling Canadian news organizations. I mean, all kinds of programs. Digital news, subscription tax credit, labor tax credit, Canadian Periodical Fund, local journalism initiative. That's money to hire journalists, primarily in what the government calls underserved communities. Online News Act. They've been trying to do that. The Online News Act that was supposed to force big technology companies to fund news outlets, share the wealth. So a lot of programs at the government level. But we want to know, do you support the idea, the very idea of that? Government money to news organizations. Not even people in the news business can agree on this one. There are some people in the news business who think the government has no business in the news business. That runs contrary to the very idea of a free press. But others are insistent that without government funding, there would be little to no privately run Canadian news outlets, especially local news outlets. It would all disappear. So the big question there, I mean, we could do a whole show just on that, is do you support the government offering support to Canadian news organizations. And as a follow-up to that, there's big tech. Big tech. The Facebooks of the world, the Googles of the world. And we'd like to know where you stand on whether they should be forced to share the wealth and contribute some of their profits to help fund Canadian news. Where do you come down on that? Where do you stand on that? You know, not everyone in the news business agrees on that either. Love to know what you think about all of this stuff. Trust in the news, paying for the news, the government giving money to news organizations, the government forcing big tech to help fund Canadian news. Give it some thought and share your opinions with us on the state of the news business in this country right now. You know better than most people about this stuff because you listen to the news. You're paying attention to the news. You're interested in the news. What do you think about the state of the news business in this country these days? And the government's attempts to try and keep the industry afloat. Join the discussion, please. We'd love to hear from you. Our call-in line, 1-833-668-2577, 1-833-668-2577. If you've never called before, just mention that. We'll make your call a priority. Talk about the news business today. Midweek edition of Talkback. Gary in Calgary up first. Hi, Gary.
You got my attention as a ex-broadcast journalist, 30-plus years. Lots of
Gary.
interesting points that you've been bringing up regarding the news business. And I've seen all kinds of changes, as you have too. And I've been around since the mid-'70s is when I got into it as a young man. It's been interesting to see what's developed. And sad to see, stations struggling and small-town newspapers struggling as well. But a lot of advertising revenue going online. And no, I wouldn't pay for news, not when there's advertising constantly popping up on the screen.
Okay. You don't pay for news? You don't have a subscription?
Nope.
To anything? You don't? Okay. And it's because you find the advertising that pops up, you find that annoying? Is that?
Well, it's annoying, and that's how they're getting their revenue. Why should I pay? There's all kinds of sources for news out there. It's a mouse click away. And really, if the station is properly managed, it should be getting enough revenue, although Chorus has struggled in recent years. They've got some expensive infrastructure here and there, and they certainly do in Calgary, and they've cut back, which is unfortunate when their AM station here was quite a powerhouse for decades.
Well, there are lots of examples of that all across the country in the radio business.
The TV station in Lloydminster, Alberta, shut down. Years before that, the TV station in Red Deer shut down. Unfortunate. Times are changing. It makes me wonder where we're headed to. But we still have a lot of good journalists in this country who no matter what, whether you're talking CBC or private stations, I'm impressed with the talent that's out there.
What do you think about the government giving financial assistance to news organizations? Do you think that compromises news coverage?
Well, it may in some people's eyes. We do give tax credits for various things and for businesses to attract businesses, and they negotiate tax holidays and stuff like that. Big business is big business. Free enterprise should be, as it always has been, survival of the fittest, and you try and adapt. And if you can't make it, then you don't survive, right? And that's what we've seen now recently with the television station in Lloydminster, Alberta. It's really unfortunate. I don't think government should be involved in that sort of thing, and any kind of tax credits. I guess it's perhaps a necessary evil in some areas, particularly if you're trying to attract a big industry in some regions. So,
okay, all right, interesting thoughts, Gary. Thank you. From a former broadcaster. Yeah, good to hear from you. To Peter in Halifax. Hi, Peter. You're on the air. What do you think?
Thank you very
Peter?
much.
Yeah, good to hear.
Well, I listen to a lot of podcasts. Usually they're like diplomats, ex-diplomats, university professors, just the whole gamut. Very, very knowledgeable, intensive people who are experts on the subject. And the subjects range from what's happening in Africa, from south to north, especially the Middle East, especially the Ukraine-Russian war, the meltdown of Europe, the meltdown of the EU, Donald Trump's antics for sure. And and I only use the computer in the library for about perhaps 6-7 hours a week. A typical web day would be the CNBC. We'll find out what the markets and dollars and stuff is doing, that tells you a lot. Okay. And then it may be Xinhao. That's the Chinese website, news site, and it's very, very informative about what's happening in China and in that area. And then I'll go to RT, and it tells me, I get a lot of information on the Ukraine war. For example,
from the
does anyone
Russian
know how
state
much money we
perspective, I
spend
suppose,
on Ukraine? Anybody?
Well, yeah, you're getting it from the Russian, like that is
Well, no, I
state
understand
control.
it, but I'm getting
right?
the Canadian news from the Canadian news. And then I'll go to the Jerusalem Post to see what's happening in the Middle East. None of these have paywalls. They're all free. Then I'll go to Haaretz to get the other side of the Israeli
Okay, very
news.
interesting. So it doesn't sound like you like to, if I could, Peter, you don't want to pay for news?
I can't afford to.
Can't afford to?
I can't
Okay,
even
fair
afford
enough.
a computer.
No, fair
I
enough.
have to go to the library.
I see. Okay.
You know, but there's a wealth of information. And then I'll go to my local hometown obituaries to see who kicked it.
Okay.
If you have it. And then I listen to the radio.
Yes.
I listen to the radio to find out what my government wants me to think. And when I'm listening to the radio news, I can turn on to the local Rogers station. And the news is exactly the same. And it's very, very limited. I hear about fires, and I hear about Mark Carney, and whatever.
Well, I would like to I think you hear about a lot more
he
than
may
that.
be making. And
Okay.
that's it I get from Canada. I never go to CBC or CTV. I don't
Okay.
even.
Well,
I don't even.
Well,
bother.
I think you would get a lot more information than that. But let me ask you: the government has decided in the past to provide financial assistance to the Canadian news industry. What do you think of
Well,
that?
how else can they tell us what to think? They have to pay people to do that.
Okay,
A-
so you
a
think
lot
it's
of the people
compromised?
that
Do you
I
think
listen
that
to,
compromises
they
the
do it for
coverage?
the love of spreading information.
Okay.
Right? They
think
look at that as a calling. They look at that as a sacred obligation to the public to inform them of what their government is doing. They look at it as a calling. And others look at it as a way to make a nice six-figure salary and get your ego fed.
Okay, well,
Have a nice day.
nice six-figure salaries. I think in the news business now are probably hard to come by, but there you go. 1-833-668-2577. We're kicking around the state of the news business in this country. Have your say and tell us what you think. And don't hold back, just like Peter. It's Talkback on News Radio. Let's go to Joe. Is in Alberta today. Hi, Joe. Thanks for calling, Joe.
Hey.
You're on the air. Hey, Joe.
How are you doing, Rob?
I'm good, Joe. How are you?
Good, good. Listen,
Good.
To answer your first question, would I pay? Would I pay for news?
Yeah,
No.
would you pay for the news? Yeah.
No, absolutely
No.
not. I mean,
Why
I used to get the newspaper years ago. I don't
Yeah.
anymore.
Okay.
Should they be compensated by social media, Facebook, whatever it may be? I think so. I mean, they make money off advertising. If people are getting it for free and seeing other advertising where the revenues aren't going to them, then their content is not being paid for. So they should be compensated with the advertising. So if somebody's collecting advertising based on their generated content, then some of that should go to them. I mean, it just makes sense.
Okay.
So I think that I came from radio news. I started in radio news back in the mid 90s. My wife has been in television for a very, very long time, since that time as well. And, you know, people say fake news. I don't know what they're thinking. I don't know if they think that they have meetings every morning and get together and try and figure out how they're going to pull one over on the public. But that doesn't happen. You know that.
Right. Okay. Okay.
It's certainly more trustworthy than Facebook.
Okay.
Or the Rebel News, you know.
Okay.
I mean, it makes no sense to me of what people think of mainstream media nowadays. They just pass on information that they get, and they're so hurting that they don't have people they can pay big money to go do major investigations to find the truth. They take information, the news of the day, coming from the government, coming from wherever, compile it, try and give both sides of the story so that the viewer can make up their own mind on what they're presenting.
Okay. So on the government providing financial assistance to news outlets, print, television, broadcast, whatever, where are you on that?
It's a tough one because it's in such a sad state of affairs right now. I would hate to see news go away. And your other caller, Gary, was talking about some stations shutting down. Chat in Medicine Hat just shut down yesterday. It's sad because if our news stations go away, which is the direction we're going, I mean, how many newspapers are? Who gets the newspaper anymore? Nobody. Some, but
right. But you used to pay. You used to subscribe to the newspaper, but you said you don't anymore.
No, because
you're one of them.
You're exactly right. It's news. The news is dying, and print is dying. Moving online, people even don't watch television news that much anymore. Not the young generation, anyway.
Yeah.
So it's
interesting.
It's
Okay.
dying as well. So what do we do? Do we try and keep them with subsidies, or do we let them fizzle out?
Isn't that it? Okay, thank you. 1-833-668-2577. Talk about the news.
Have something on your mind you want everyone to know?
Call now.
Hello.
1-833-668-2577.
It's Talk Back on Now You Know with Rob Snow.
Tell you about the state of the modern day news industry in this country. With your help at 1-833-668-2577. 1-833-668-2577. 4 lines available there for you right now. And tell us what you think about what's been going on in the news business. From any conceivable angle, how do you rate, for example, your trust in the news? It's been declining in Canada. What are the reasons behind that? Do you trust the news? Paying for news. Not a lot of people will pay for news in Canada. It's like 9 out of 10 people that just won't pay for news. What about you? You actually subscribe to a news service? Why do you do that? If so, why do you do that? What kind of news? A major point of contention, even in the news industry itself, has been government support for news outlets. Whether that's, defund the CBC was a thing during the election campaign and in the run-up to the election campaign. But also financial assistance from the federal government to privately run news outlets. Where do you stand on that? It's been quite controversial. Some people think that compromises news coverage. At least that is the perception. The previous government had its Online News Act. It really wanted to force companies like Facebook, Google to share the wealth, compensate news organizations for things like lost advertising. Google managed to come to an agreement with the government. Facebook is still blocking Canadian news content. It just refused to participate in that whole scheme that the Trudeau government dreamed up. So there are lots of ways to talk about this. Really love to hear from you on this today. At 1-833-668-2577. 1-833-668-2577. The wait won't be too long, and your opinions will be most valued. My gosh, how times have changed, David. My gosh, how times have changed in the news business. Whenever we talk about the state of the news, I start to reminisce, reminisce. Not only about my time in the news business, 26 years plus. I'm not even that old. But all kinds of memories kind of they come flooding back whenever I talk about this. You know, this morning I was thinking about growing up in my parents' home in Nova Scotia, all those decades ago. And I remember my father, he would get 2 newspapers delivered to the house. Like 2 print newspapers, like thick newspapers. I think there might have been even 3 newspapers delivered at the house at one point. There would be a newspaper in the morning. There would be a newspaper in the afternoon. We get the Cape Breton Post, get the Halifax Chronicle Herald. And for a while, there was even another paper. I think it was called the Mail Star. Mail Star out of Halifax. I'm sure some of our listeners in Halifax will remember that newspaper, the Mail Star. But anyway, my father would get home from work every day, shortly after 4 o'clock in the afternoon. And he would sit in the living room in this recliner that he had, and he would read the newspaper. From end to end. He would just read that newspaper, and it was you weren't to bother my father while he was reading the newspaper. Like, you were to be seen and not heard, if you know what I mean. And then 5 o'clock, the news would come on, live at 5. And then at 6 o'clock, the 6 o'clock news would come on, local news. And then, at night, you'd watch the national news. And a lot of the local news, you get caught up in the morning. You listen to the radio news in the morning. This is a very different news industry. And then newspapers, thick with ads and pages and pages and pages of classified ads. And of course, most of that is gone now. Most of that is gone now. Your thoughts on the news industry and what the government's been trying to do to support the news industry, whether you think that's the right thing to do. Keith is in Calgary. Let's get Keith on the line. Hi, Keith. Hey, Keith, how are you?
Living the dream. You know how it is.
Oh, yeah, living the dream. Sure, yeah.
Yeah, just to, sort of comment on a couple of the points, I guess. I think a huge part of the problem in the news is it's been basically replaced. Like you were talking earlier about the newspapers and stuff, there used to be, pretty much 3 papers around where I was. There was sort of the national one, and then the Globe and Mail, and then there was a couple of local ones, and one was sort of left-leaning, one was sort of right-leaning, and the national one was sort of financially oriented and, matters of national interest, more to that angle, right?
Okay.
So one thing that's happened, obviously, is the internet has replaced a lot of that for a source. People's attention span is so much less than it used to be also. The newspapers themselves have shrunk to the point where there's basically not much in them anymore, and, justifiably so, because they can't sell any advertising or get any, classified revenue. So what can they put in there? How many reporters can they pay? So then comes what remains is, seriously questioned by anybody that watches it, because where's the funding coming from? Well, it's pretty clear that, the CBC and whatnot is, horrifically biased towards Liberals, and there's, obvious reason for that. I mean, it was part of Trudeau's campaign was to basically pay them off. So how is it for anybody not to expect them to say whatever Trudeau wants?
Okay. Well,
if I'm paying the bill, you're gonna say what I want you to.
But
you're
also,
not gonna speak against me, or you're gonna get cut off, right?
So let me ask you this, because there are all sorts of other programs to help fund other media now, outside of the whatever the CBC is going to get. We have there's all kinds of digital news subscription tax credit, labor tax credit, periodical fund, local journalism initiative, online, all of these programs, right? Not just for the CBC. Should the government be funding news organizations at all is an interesting question. What do you think?
it's kind of difficult because how they either disappear or they get government funding, basically, because I don't think there's enough general interest to justify charging for the advertising. If you charge too much for ad space, you don't get any ads, right?
Right.
So
Right.
if they charge enough for the ad space to actually maintain the service, I don't know if that works either.
Right. But
So
do you
is-
think it
is
compromises?
a bit of a quandary. It is
I know,
a quandary
I know.
for sure.
Again, what I come back to is there even the part of the problem is the perception is there that if the government is giving money to news organizations, then the news is going to be compromised somehow.
Well,
Which is already your impression of the
that's the direct
CBC, for
perception,
example.
isn't it? You know, that would be the way you'd think of it. You know, at least
Right.
me, anyways. I'm sort of cynical that way, I guess. But
Right. Okay.
but I don't think I'm alone in that. I think that's a
Oh,
fairly
I don't think you're
popular-
alone at all. I don't think you're alone at all. I see that all the time. Thank you for calling. Really great to get your thoughts on it, Keith. Yeah, really appreciate the call today. Andrea in Kitchener. Yeah, hi there. Yeah, good to hear from you.
Hi, nice to be on. So, yeah, I do have 2 news subscriptions.
You do?
So I have
Okay.
2 news subscriptions. I have a subscription to my local newspaper and a
You do?
subscription
Okay.
to the Globe and Mail.
Okay.
Digital
Why
subscriptions,
do you do
know.
that? Why do you do that?
Well, one of the interesting information that I want to know is behind the paywall. And
Okay.
I figure if you're going to get good quality news, then you should, be willing to pay for it. People used to have the newspaper delivered, to their home.
Sure.
They paid
Yeah.
for the news. But,
Yeah.
why should I be any different in this generation, right?
Okay. You're very
The only
much in the
difference is
minority
that
there
you,
in
you
doing
know,
that.
You can't share the newspaper with your friend, right? You used to have the newspaper and the whole family would read it, one newspaper. Maybe they should go back to family and friend subscriptions where a whole bunch of people
Oh,
could
maybe.
read one
Okay.
subscription.
Yeah.
But
yeah,
I
very-
actually believe CBC is underfunded. I think we do need a bipartisan news outlet. I think that we need to get both sides of the story, and I think the best way to do that is to have a publicly funded news outlet. And I trust corporations and corporate ownership of news outlets less than I would trust a government-funded news outlet that has, oversight.
Okay. You're putting a lot of faith in the government there, though, aren't you?
We voted them in. What other option do we have? You have to trust them to some extent, but that is why you have the oversight. You're not asking the prime minister to vet the news every day or the ruling party. You've got to have someone, or a body that is able to, sort of make those non-biased decisions. Everybody has a bias, I understand.
Sure. Yeah.
But and I think it's false that the new generation doesn't want to see the news and that their attention is limited. I think that's false. I think you just have to go where the people are. So if you want to reach younger people, then you need to go where those younger people are.
Okay. So you support having a public broadcaster, which is fine. What about providing financial assistance to privately run news organizations? What do you think through all of these myriad of programs that the government has created?
Well, I think we provide all kinds of grants and funding for the movie industry, for other types of industries that hire people, bring tax dollars back into, the government, put money into the economy for people to spend, to provide services. Why is the news any different? It's just one other industry. It's a type of, frankly,
well, I think the
entertainment.
argument would be, can you trust a news organization to be critical of a government if that news organization has to rely on the government for its funding? Is that news organization not compromised? Then?
I think a lot of the
Is that
granting is
perception
done
not
at
even?
arm's
Yeah.
length. I think there's a perception of that, but in my experience, I work in the arts and culture industry. When you're looking at grant funding, I think it's a lot less partisan than you would think, and you need to rely on those knowledgeable agencies to dole out the dollars in a fair way. I think people are Being,
Sorry,
you know, we're
Andrea.
a civilization.
Right. I'm sorry, Andrea. Your phone cracked up there. Can you just share your
Right.
last thought with me, please? Just repeat what you said.
People just seem very distrustful, but you know, we're all in this together, folks. So, you know, trust your fellow
No.
person.
Yeah. Okay. What about the idea of technology companies compensating news organizations? The government is really trying to extract money from big tech, even in your industry, you know, to fund, Canadian content or Canadian programming one way or another, that somehow big tech should be helping to fund that in this country. Do you think that's the case?
I agree. They've got billions of dollars.
do?
Why not?
Okay.
They shouldn't be, that money should not be left concentrated at that level. And if they're using content that, you know, regular people like you and me are making, you know, you want to be compensated if your name and image gets used out there. So does everybody else. And they should
Okay.
be.
Thank you. Very interesting.
Okay.
Thank you.
Have something on your mind you want everyone to know?
Call now.
Hello.
1-833-668-2577.
It's Talk Back on Now You Know with Rob Snow.
We are tight on time in this hour. If you are on the line, I really hope you'll stick around till hour number 2, full hour just ahead, coming up right after the latest breaking news. We are talking about the news business in Canada from all sorts of different angles today with the help of callers like Paul from Kitchener. Hello, Paul.
Hey, Rob. Thanks for taking my call.
Yeah, my pleasure.
I just wanted to throw my 2 cents worth in. And when I heard you talking about it, I don't think I could distrust the news media any more than I do now.
Why is that?
And the reason why is about 10 years ago now, I found a couple of smaller independent news sites, and they were quoting stories from different areas. So I have about 20 news sites bookmarked on my tablet at home from all around the world. And to just give you an idea as to what I learned from them is long before Trump took office in his first term, remember all the Russiagate stuff, I was reading stories that it was Hillary Clinton who put it on long before he was even sworn in. And the Durham report from a couple of years ago confirmed that, and even more, that the FBI and CIA were in on it. I was reading long before he even put his name in the hat that Joe Biden had dementia, and we listened to that he was sharp as a tack until the day of that debate. And the last one was that really put the nail in it for me was when Elon Musk bought Twitter and started releasing interdepartmental emails where they were discussing COVID, and basically what it was, if you didn't hear about it, because most people didn't, because the mainstream media wouldn't cover it, but it was the White House and pretty much every three-letter agency you could think of was colluding with the online presences like Facebook, Instagram, and I'm not sure what other media, and they were censoring what we were hearing.
Yeah,
about
to censor stuff. Yeah. So a lot of American influence there. A lot of American influence.
But Canadian, there's a lot of the Canadian stuff too. Like we heard, when they were demonstrating in Ottawa about the COVID
Freedom Convoy
stuff. It was it was all, they were blaming it on the Russians. It was just crazy. But it's even factual stuff about COVID that we needed to know everywhere. We were being told the same thing everywhere.
Okay.
I have a friend of mine who deals
so
with...
let me ask you, do you, so you don't pay for any news now from any Canadian service then? You wouldn't subscribe to it?
Yes,
You
actually
wouldn't.
I do. Yes, actually I do. I pay for my local paper, and I pay for one, and I pay for one international paper, and to be honest with you, Rob, I follow what I would consider liberal news sites, and I follow conservative ones because I want to hear everything. I want to hear everything.
Very good. Very good.
all right.
Fair enough. Yeah, look, great final call for this hour. Again, to our listeners who may be on hold, hour number 2 is coming up. We'll continue our discussion then on the state of the news business in Canada. And you feel free to join the discussion and share your opinions on Talkback on this Wednesday here on News Radio.
It's time to talk back.
On Now You Know with Rob Snow.
Call now.
And have your say.
1-833-668-2577.
So we've been gathering your opinions on kind of the state of the news industry in the country. Welcome to hour number 2 of Talkback. Do you trust the news? That's one question we've been asking. Are you willing to pay for news? That's another question. What do you think about the government giving taxpayer money to news organizations? Is that something you're in favor of? Or forcing big tech, Facebook, Google, to compensate, to share the wealth with Canadian news outlets? Just many angles to explore the topic. Let's go to Imran in Calgary. Thanks for calling, Imran. Hello, Imran. Are you there? Okay, let's try Francine then. Francine, you're up next on Talkback. Hello, Francine.
Hi, Rob. How are you?
Hi, Francine. Yeah, go ahead. What's your opinion?
I wasn't really into politics until this last election, and I used to have cable, and I used to subscribe to the Calgary Herald. But as a result of mainstream media, mainly CBC, I canceled both. I was just so disgusted with CBC. To me, they're just a liberal propaganda machine.
Okay.
And they're so biased because of the money, the billions of dollars that they receive from the Liberal government. And it's so obvious, like my degree is in communications, and you just listen to their questions and the questions that they would ask conservatives. It's clear that they would softball the questions for Carney and attack.
All right.
The conservative.
I don't want this to become like a big CBC bashing thing. That's not that, because one of the other questions that I'm asking is that the government is not just helping to fund the CBC. The government is now helping to fund all kinds of news outlets, the public broadcaster, and all kinds of private news outlets. Okay. Some won't take the money. Some don't qualify for the money. Some don't take the money. The question is, do you think the government should be giving your money to news outlets at all? Like with the CBC, you would say no, right? Because you think it skews their coverage. But what about other news outlets?
Well, I think that they should give some. And I agree that Facebook and Meta and all those, like, they make billions of dollars. They can afford to pay for media as well.
Okay. So if they were forced to compensate news organizations, you would be in favor of that? You would?
Yeah, I would.
Now, you say you used to subscribe to your local newspaper, but you don't anymore. Why is that?
Well, just because it tends to be one-sided.
You think it's too one-sided? Okay.
And there doesn't really seem to be much actual investigation. And when I did subscribe to it, like, I learned more from the online comments. And I'm thinking about subscribing to the National Post because they're the only ones that.
Okay. Owned by the same company, I would just point out. Owned by the same company. Okay. Francine, thank you. Thank you. You've been very clear. Yeah, I really appreciate it. Let's circle back and try Imran again. Imran, are you with me?
Yes, sir. How you doing, Rob?
Yes, I'm good. Thank you for calling. What's your opinion?
I feel that with the social media now so much popular and world-renowned, everybody's using it, and it's so instantaneous, it's free. And people, I think, don't have the time to listen to any specific news channel or read a newspaper. Those days were when there were no social media, when they were.
Okay. I think Imran, we're having problems with Imran's phone. I think he's in one of those Calgary dead zones for cell coverage. I think we're going to have to pass on Imran today. To Chris up next. Hi, Chris.
Hey,
Hi,
Rob.
Chris.
How you doing today?
I'm good, Chris. How are you doing today?
I'm doing great. First of all, very quickly, I want to apologize to you and your listeners. About a week ago, on a call to you, I made an inappropriate joke about something I thought you should do to go up on Parliament Hill since you live in Ottawa. My supposed joke fell with a thud, and I do recognize.
Okay, I don't even remember it, sir. So it's all it's water off a duck's back. Don't worry yourself about that. Yeah.
Anyway, regards to the media, I'm opposed to government funding any media, period, 100%, and that's whether it's conservative media or news media or liberal news media. The purpose of the news media is to act as our eyes and ears to keep governments honest. And there's a saying when I worked in business that there is a conflict of interest and then there's a perceived conflict of interest, and both are very, very bad. And as soon as government is giving a news organization any money, that news organization becomes somewhat beholden to that government. And again, I'm a conservative, but I would feel the same way in terms of if it was a conservative government funding government. Government should stay out of funding the news, period.
Period. Full stop. What about forcing big tech to pay for news?
I'm opposed to that too, and here's why.
Okay.
News organizations who have social media pages can monetize those pages and earn income. I'm opposed to the government forcing businesses to do things. Unless it has to do with something like workplace health and safety, or something along that lines. But to force social media companies to provide funding for news media, I'm not in agreement with that. Personally, I think news media should rely on subscriptions, advertising revenue, and if they can't make a business case for doing that, then perhaps they don't have a legitimate reason for existing.
Okay. Thank you for your call. Good to hear from you, Chris. Yep. Bye-bye. Back to the phones. Jody is in Calgary. Hello, Jody.
Hey, Rob. How you doing?
I'm good, Jody. Thanks. Yeah. What's your
first
opinion?
of all, let's go Oilers, please. Oilers.
Go
we
Oilers.
Need it.
Yes. Yeah.
Okay. I don't trust the the media, especially in Canada. Like not at all.
Not at all.
After watching the CBC election night broadcast, and when they were like basically celebrating because the Liberals won, it really turned me off. And then they laughed at Poilievre about they were going to houses and people were calling Poilievre names and stuff, and they were laughing at Poilievre. And I think CBC is one of the most biased news channels or whatever in the world. They're a joke. And I do like Vashi Kapelas for CTV. I do like her. I think she's a pretty honest journalist, and I like her.
All right.
But as in giving money to the media, no, not at all.
Not at all. The government should just stay out of the news business, in your opinion.
Stay out of it 100%, because Canada's turning into what's his name, Joseph Goebbels of the Nazis with this propaganda BS. I know it's kind of over the top what I said there, but
yeah, a bit over the top.
They should stay out of it, and as in the media, the big tech like Facebook and Google and stuff. I think they should pay a little bit of money.
Okay, that's interesting. Thank you, Jody. Again, I don't want this to become a big CBC bashing thing, because the CBC is not the only one that's getting government money now. I mean, the CBC is pretty much fully funded by the government now, $1.5 billion or whatever it is. It's an enormous sum of money. But as I said, the government has all kinds of programs aimed at supporting the news. Digital news subscription tax credit. You subscribe. Okay, here's your tax slip. Use that when you file your income tax. We have a labor tax credit. The federal government will give a tax credit to news organizations to offset the cost of hiring people to work in newsrooms. Periodical fund's been around forever. That is money that flows to community newspapers and magazines. One of the newer ones is the local journalism initiative. That is like direct money here. Go hire a journalist. We'll pay up to 25% of the wages. That's primarily for the government aims to do that for underserved communities, small town, rural Canada. And the Online News Act was supposed to force big technology companies to fund Canadian news outlets. Stay tuned on where that one goes. Al in Alberta is up next. Hi, Al.
Hello, Rob.
Hi, Al. Good to hear.
I'm going to switch you over to the other side of the news business. In 1954, I guess it was, I was talked into taking a newspaper route for the Regina Leader-Post in small town Saskatchewan after having delivered milk for 2 years in the bottles to the town of Wapella and Mooseman. Anyway, I thought, holy man, this kid talked me into taking on this newspaper because I could make so much more money. And after about 7 weeks of having to go back 15 times to get my 35 cents from a half a dozen people, I thought, I don't need this crap. So I got out of the news business. And really what's happened to the news business, I'm glad I did.
Okay.
Anyway.
Okay.
It turned out we had the two Leader Post and we had the Winnipeg Tribune. But I just thought, holy man, no wonder the thing is going to hell. As far as your deal about paying for the local news, like by the big boys, Google and Facebook, I think they should pay because, damn it,
you too.
There are people out there working their butts off, and they deserve to be paid. But no, and one of your recent callers talked about the CBC being so bad. Perhaps you should listen to Pravda maybe once in a while and go and listen to that side of the story.
Okay.
I'll talk to you later.
Talk to you later, Al. Yeah, we'll talk to you later in just a few minutes from now because we have to stop here. But there's 3 lines available there for you, folks, at 1-833-668-2577. On the state of the news business in Canada, let's go to Ivan up next on Talkback. Hi, Ivan.
Hello.
Hi, Ivan.
So just wanted to share my thoughts. I think we are leading in a time of bubble or echo chambers because on one hand we have a collapse of the traditional media, people losing trust to those, and on the other hand we have lots of seemingly independent, quote unquote, journalists who have some questionable reputation, and this is causing some lack of awareness of what's going on around us, and people live in their own bubbles and rarely come out of this comfort. That's why I'm not kind of thinking that it's right for me to subscribe to any of the news outlets because, as I said, so people have a lack of trust to those.
Okay, so you don't subscribe to any news service?
No.
No? Okay. How would you say you consume your news? Where do you get your news and information?
Some YouTube. Maybe social media. Again, with a grain of salt.
With a grain of salt because you realize it's dictated by algorithms and curated to your own, say, personal views
so
and
algorithms
whatnot.
are feeding me more and more of the same stuff that I probably watched or liked.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Exactly. Very good.
I will bring one example of what I particularly don't like. So, for example, CTV News in Canada. Every news broadcast, they are showing some. They have an agenda about female sports, and they're showing some reporting from some female hockey, female football, or whatever, and none of the other sports are getting coverage equal to this. And like every time I see this news broadcast, I'm just turning off my my TV when I see this. It's just it's unbearable.
Okay, all right, Ivan. Thank you. Fair enough. Yeah, interesting. Really like the point about echo chambers. That is certainly a phenomenon right now, a trend, if you will, a thing we're going to have to live with, I suppose. Owen in Guelph. Owen. Hi, Owen.
Hello.
Hi, Owen. You're on the air. Please share your thoughts on the news business.
Yeah, I just thought I'd call in. I'm pretty young, so I haven't heard many young people talking. It's interesting. The last person brought up echo chambers and said because of that they wouldn't subscribe to mainstream news. But I mean, echo chambers are a direct result of the algorithms that dictate what is shown to you on social media. You know, like social media has been shown to promote emotionally inflammatory content. You know, stuff that kind of gets people worked up, and you know, the stuff you engage with on an emotional level is going to be what shows you more. So if you're against the idea of everyone being in their echo chambers, then I would recommend, you know, going outside of social media for your information.
Okay. Yeah, he said with a grain of salt. He did add that, with a grain of salt.
Yeah.
Okay.
So
yeah,
it's good that he added that. And yeah, I feel like a lot of people, when it comes to government funding the news, like, yes, anyone who funds the news is going to have potential impacts on, you know, what news is broadcast, you know, and that's an issue too with the news industry relying on advertising. You know, like the news industry, they're not going to show content that advertisers might not feel comfortable putting their ads next to, right? So that's an issue just in general, but it's like someone earlier said, like everyone has biases. But I think really like what to consider is if you're not looking at mainstream news and you're looking at social media, I mean, I'm guilty of this. I look at YouTube a lot for information. But if you're looking mainly at social media, like Facebook, then like that's owned, like you were saying, by like big tech, you know, very, very large tech conglomerates that their only focus really is to increase their stakeholder like or shareholder value, right?
Okay. Thank you for your call. Back right after the news.
It's Talk Back on Now You Know with Rob Snow.
Yeah, Wednesday Talk Back, and we've been talking about the news business today. The news business in Canada, your trust in the news, whether you are willing to pay for news. You get beyond that paywall, you know. What kind of news would you be willing to pay for? Are you willing to pay for? Are you paying for? What about the government supporting the news business? Very controversial. Also, technology companies being forced to compensate Canadian news organizations. Trust in the news. David, trust in the news. I was reading about that this morning. Trust in the news.
Yeah.
If you work in the news business and you read about trust in the news, let me tell you, it can make for thoroughly depressing reading.
It can be hurtful. It can be.
We have some lines available, by the way, right now. David and I are just going to kick this around for a few minutes, but we want to hear from you instead. 1-833-668-2577. Every year, the University of Laval, they have a journalism program there. They do what's called the Digital News Report. The Digital News Report. Really interesting stuff in there. And they ask about trust in the news and whether Canadians trust the news. And the last figure that it published, 40% of Canadians say they trust the news. 40%, Dave. 40%. And it's even lower among Anglophones. Francophones actually trust the news a little bit more, but among Anglophones, it's down to 37%.
Yeah, see, that's not very good. Yeah, low number.
Right? Only 37% are saying they trust the news. 49% for Francophones. Not sure what explains the divide there, but if you're in the news business, I mean, that's not good because it means, a clear majority of people don't trust you. It has been a fairly recent thing, the decline in the trust in the news. It's the last decade or so where you really see it accelerate. I mean, the majority of Canadians used to trust the news a decade ago when Laval was asking this back in 2016. And ever since then, they put it on a chart and you can see it. It's downhill from there, from 55% down to 40% in about 8 years. And I was thinking, well, what has happened in the last 8 years that could explain that? This erosion of trust in the news media. For example, do you think it has anything to do with the election of Donald Trump in 2016? Maybe the fact that much of the media discounted his ability to win the election in 2016, or his constant talk about the news is the enemy of the people, the media is the enemy of the people, fake news, that kind of stuff. Because trust in the news media was a lot higher before Trump was elected than it is now. Or does it have something to do with the pandemic? One of the callers brought it up, felt that the media wasn't giving the full story when it came to the pandemic. I mean, that was a major multi-year news event that also happened in the last decade or so, the pandemic. I don't know. These are just questions that I have. Why the trust in the news, when they go out, they ask a lot of people, do you trust the news? It's fallen from 55% down to 40% in less than a decade. What is going on there? 1-833-668-2577. To Sean in Calgary. Thanks for calling, Sean. Hey, Sean. Oh, John. Sorry, John, not Sean. Hello, John. That's my fault, John.
Hi,
John.
You, Rob?
I'm good, John, now that we've connected. Sorry about that.
It's okay. I think news network is like sunset business to me. Like, remember the Blockbuster?
Yeah, Blockbuster for sure. Yeah.
Like you said, government is spending how much? $1 billion a year on CBC alone.
Well, it's more than that. It's closer to 1.5. Yeah, but what's a $500 million between friends?
And then how much are they paying their, executives out of this?
Well, they're very well paid. I'm sure the executives at the CBC are doing just fine. Yeah. But again, what I come back to, because I don't want this to be a CBC bashing thing, all kinds of media organizations are now qualifying in one way or another for government assistance. So one of the questions is, should the government be providing assistance to the news business as a business at all?
To me, as long as they pay their workers well, like, a news broadcaster or the people who do, it's like the Canada Post workers thing. What I'm trying to say is this. Because instead of paying your executive like ridiculous salary or bonuses, if they put the money back to the workers, I totally will support it.
Okay.
And to me, I don't know whether $1.5 billion is a good way to spend money on. I'm sure there are better ways to spend this money, like maybe help some of the kids. Pardon their student loan, that would be a good investment.
Well, sure. I mean, if $1.5 billion fell from the sky, you could ask 100 different people and they would come up with 100 different priorities on how to spend $1.5 billion worth of the government's money, whether it's on, providing better student loans or forgiving student loans or improving old age security or spend it on national defense, whatever. It'd be a long list, sir. Your point is taken. Thank you for your call.
Have something on your mind you want everyone to know?
Call now.
Hello.
1-833-668-2577.
It's Talk Back on Now You Know with Rob Snow.
Again, just we have one eye on what's going on in the House of Commons. There's been a development here that we just want to tell you about. I mentioned off the top of the show today, they're voting on the speech from the throne today. So this is an automatic confidence vote. And normally this would be fairly routine, but, you know, it's a minority government. Surprises can happen, I suppose. The government was clearly caught off guard when it lost a vote on amendments to the throne speech. It didn't expect that to happen. So it has given this some, I would say, heightened curiosity. So now the New Democrats, they have 7 seats in the House. The Liberals would surely love to have those 7 New Democrat votes. If all 7 New Democrats stood up and said, yeah, we're okay with the throne speech, we'll vote for the throne speech, then the government survives. But then Don Davies, who is the interim leader of the New Democrats in the House, walked to the microphone within the last hour or so on Parliament Hill and said, we're not going to vote for the throne speech. David, do you have some audio of that?
New Democrats met in caucus this morning, and we decided that we are going to be voting no to the throne speech. 1.2 million Canadians sent New Democrats to this Parliament to advocate for working families across this country. And yet, in this throne speech, we don't see those priorities reflected. Millions of Canadians don't have access to an affordable home. They don't have access to timely health care, and they don't have access to the good family-sustaining jobs that they need. And yet the throne speech doesn't even mention the words health care. You won't even find those words in the throne speech. There is no mention of non-market housing, cooperative housing, or housing for Indigenous people, some of the most acute needs in this country when it comes to...
The Democrats are a no on the throne speech. So what does that mean? Well, the Liberals, they have 169 Liberal MPs, but remember, they elected one of them as the Speaker. The Speaker only votes if there's a tie. So they really have 168, 173, so 5. They need to find 5 people to vote for the throne speech. I believe my math is right there, Dave. I would suspect one of them is probably Elizabeth May from the Greens, so they need 4. So now they have to go kind of shopping around. Hey, we need 4 votes. We need 4 votes. Where can we find 4 votes? So it's over to you, Bloc Québécois. One of the things I think the Liberals might be able to count on is that the Prime Minister, Mark Carney, gave this really huge defense earlier in the week of supply management. He was asked, are you going to defend supply management? Yes, absolutely. I will defend supply management and agriculture, something very important to the Bloc Québécois. It even has a bill that it wants to pass through the House of Commons. So, but nevertheless, could be a little drama today, because if there's a vote on the throne speech and the Liberals lose, there could be another election. Imagine 2 elections, Dave. 2 elections? And one so soon after the last one? I don't know. See what happens.
I mean, I'm up for it, but I am not most people. I think most people probably not up for it.
I don't think so. John in Cambridge, we're talking about the news business. Circle back here. Hi, John.
Hey, Rob. How are you?
I'm good, John. Thanks for calling. Good to hear from you. On the news business.
Hear you.
On the news business,
Rob,
John.
I wanted to touch a little bit on the discussion about whether there's trust in the media.
Yes.
And my thoughts are, if it was 5 years ago, I would have said we live in the information age. The ability to get any kind of information we want from the internet or other sources, whether it be TikTok or Instagram or whatever. The challenge now is that we are getting information from sources besides, news outlets that is deceiving what the reality is when it comes to news events. And I think that is where some of this distrust might be coming from, because people who get their information from the news are not sure who to believe anymore, whether it's the news or whether it's the internet. And I think that's a huge problem, and it's a perception problem. And there's a lot of misinformation floating around out there, and I think that's where this comes from.
Right. That people they're not sure who to trust, so they don't trust anybody, whether it's traditional news outlets or new upstarts or what have you.
Or they don't know who to trust.
Or they don't know who to trust. Just a general lack of trust. Okay. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Really cool. Thank you, John in Cambridge. Luke in Calgary up next. Luke, you're on the air. Luke.
How are you, man?
I'm good, Luke. Good to hear from you. Thank you. Go ahead.
So, yeah, a lot of it's already been said, but I definitely disagree that we're funding media outlets in general. Like, a business should be able to survive on its own, right? If it can't, then it shouldn't exist. And it's tricky, right? Because we keep saying, should the government be paying for them? But it's not the government paying for them. The government doesn't pay for anything. They tax us and use our money to pay for it, or they print the money and create inflation, and we pay the tax that way.
Fair enough.
Right? We shouldn't be paying for it. And then I thought it was interesting. You pointed out that the trust in the media has taken a dive in the last decade. And for me, that's when I stopped believing them too, because I didn't really pay much attention to it until Donald Trump ran for the presidency the first time. And then it became obvious that they were telling lies or, misleading or not being just honest in the way they were doing it and the way they were interviewing him versus the Democrats. And I started paying attention. And once I started paying attention, it's obvious to me that there's a narrative that they are pushing. Like right now, the narrative is that Donald Trump is creating a recession in Canada. But if you just look up the charts for unemployment in Canada over the last several years, you'll see that it was at like 5-ish% in 2023 and has been ticking up since February, March of 23. So it's all the Liberals doing. It had nothing to do with Trump.
Okay.
They're just, it's very.
Right. But
very
Trump was a turning
dishonest
point for you. But to your point, Trump was a turning point for you in your trust in the news media, right?
It was the way they were trying to sell me on what a horrible human being he was and how it was the end of the world if he became president. And it was just
sure thing.
It's just kind of gross. You feel gross when you listen to the news now.
Okay, all right. Well, I'll try not to take that personally, Luke. Thank you.
Not
gonna
you,
move
Rob.
along.
Come on, man.
Okay, no. I'm just gonna Well, I'm in the news business here, man. I mean, a lot of callers have pointed this out. If they don't support the government propping up the news business or giving financial support to the news business, this is progress. This is how the world works. You either adapt or you die. This is one of the things that we have heard today, and that those that didn't adapt are dying. And we wouldn't bail out, for example, we wouldn't bail out the horse and buggy business in the age of the automobile, or the government didn't come along and bail out the local record store business. We didn't bail out Sam the Record Man because music streaming came along. One of our callers even brought up Blockbuster Video. So like a government moved in and bailed out Blockbuster Video because Netflix came along. And so this line of thinking goes, we shouldn't be propping up the traditional news industry because somebody invented a better mousetrap. And others still will point out, yes, all kinds of news outlets have gone under. They have gone dark, television stations, radio stations, and more than 500 local news outlets since the year 2008, costing 14,000 newsroom jobs. But at the same time, all sorts of other news outlets have been created. And some argue there are actually more choices now than there ever used to be. And there is a case to be made that news organizations shouldn't be taking government money because their job is to report on the government and hold the government to account, and that you are compromised if you're taking money from the government. even if you're not really compromised. The problem is the perception that you are. Thanks for the discussion today. Good one. We're going to be back tomorrow. Brand new topic, more of your calls, I hope, on Talkback on News Radio.